Cut.
It was me pretending to be Mario.
Outrageous. Oh, I thought you were pretending to be me. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Okay, we played in the pool. That was fun.
We did, yeah. Yeah, we got a little floaty basketball net.
Yeah.
The air quality was good, so I was like, let's do this.
Yep.
It was super fun. You swished 5 in a row. It floats around, so it's not on the side. It's just like basically floating on like a cut together pool noodle.
Yeah. That's never going to happen again.
What? The 5 swishes?
Yeah.
Yeah, only 6, 7, 8.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was fun. Now we got some tea. The sun is setting.
Oh, yeah, it's nighttime.
It's cooler than it has been in a little while.
Mm-hmm.
What else is new? It's Sunday.
It's August.
It's August.
Summer is over, basically.
Summer is basically over. How long do you have? 3 weeks? 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm. 2 weeks of freedom.
It's still like a fourth of your summer, so let's enjoy it. Let's not give up the last fourth just because it's the last fourth. Anything else?
No, I have nothing. Just real boring over here.
Alrighty. Wands ready. Turn to page 96. Talons and Tea Leaves. Today's lesson is called...
Oh my gosh, we're having tea. I didn't even think about that.
Oh!
I just grabbed tea just because it's nighttime. But oh my gosh, we got to read our tea leaves after this.
That's a can do, yes. While that's still really hot. I'm going to let that sit for a minute. Today's lesson is called Vague Fortunes. A synopsis. The chapter begins with Harry ready for his new year at Hogwarts. He gets his new schedule and sets off on his first day with Ron and Hermione. First up, Divination with Professor Trelawney. After Sir Cadogan helps lead them to the classroom, they begin learning about reading tea leaves to see a person's future. Eventually, Trelawney herself reads Harry's tea leaves and sees in them the Grim, a wizarding omen for death. Harry is very upset by this, as are the other third years, before Professor McG dispels the notion that Harry is doomed to die because Professor Trelawney proclaims so. Later, our trio heads down to Hagrid's first class as Care of Magical Creatures professor. He leads them in a lesson on hippogriffs, beginning with Harry meeting Buckbeak, who allows Harry to fly on his back. Eventually, Malfoy insults Buckbeak, who gashes his arm. This leads to a commotion, and eventually to Hagrid being drunk, believing he will lose his job. Hermione encourages Hagrid to sober up before Hagrid realizes they are out with Sirius Black on the loose and yells at Harry to get back to the school.
These people, man. Every time I read a chapter, I'm like, these people.
These people.
Okay, so I'm just going in the order of my notes. I was looking at the people mostly in this chapter.
These people?
No, yes, these people.
I see.
So Pansy Parkinson, we met Pansy, I believe, in the first book. I can't remember, but I believe we've seen her before.
Okay.
The Parkinson family is part of the Sacred 28, and from an interview, J.K. Rowling has revealed that she loathes Pansy as a character. Absolutely. Well, because the question specifically was about Draco, and the question was, does Draco end up marrying Pansy? And she was just like, no, God, no. And she's like, sorry, I don't like Draco, but I dislike Pansy even more. And she called her the anti-Hermione, and she's just a bully. She's the bully, and she's like, I guess, like, I forgot about she, like, really, really is obsessed with Malfoy. It's kind of, I don't know, I guess I forgot about her for a while, but, yeah, J.K. Rowling does not like her at all as a character.
Good to know. Good to know.
We also met someone named Sir Cadogan. Oh, man. Okay, so there is writing.
Oh, my gosh.
There is writing on the Wizarding World website about
some fanfic?
him. No, by J.K. Rowling.
All right. What do we got?
Okay, so it's believed in wizarding circles that Sir Cadogan was one of the famous knights at the Round Table.
Oh.
And that it's rumored that he achieved this position because he was friends with Merlin.
Mm.
And apparently he has been excised from all Muggle volumes of King Arthur's
Because he himself is a wizard?
What? Who?
Sir Cadogan?
Sir Cadogan
Okay.
is a wizard.
Okay.
So part of the historical context is that the way that it was framed is that it wasn't unusual for wizards to live among Muggles before the International Statute of Secrecy.
Right.
So that's what he did. He just like lived in this village, and so he was a wizard, and apparently he's not in the Muggle version of these stories. His most famous encounter was with the Wyvern of Wye, a dragonish creature that was terrorizing the West Country. So in first encounter, the beast ate Sir Cadogan's steed, bit his wand in half, and melted his sword and visor.
Oh, dear.
Unable to see through the steam rising from his melting helmet, Sir Cadogan barely escaped with his life. However, rather than running away, he staggered into a nearby meadow, grabbed a small, fat pony grazing there, leapt upon it, and galloped back towards the wyvern with nothing but his broken wand. Eventually, he managed to take it down.
Oh, dear.
And apparently, elderly witches and wizards have a saying, "I'll take Cadogan's pony." And that means I'll salvage the best that I can from a tricky situation.
Nice.
So that's part of the broader wizarding world context.
Do we have like a Muggle phrase for it?
I have no idea of, I don't know.
I'm going to think on that one.
So I couldn't find it on this site, but from a wiki, it said that he was sorted into Gryffindor. And because of the time period, probably was taught by Godric Gryffindor himself. I couldn't find an actual source for it, but it was on the wiki. That's probably he probably was taught by Gryffindor himself, and also is known for his hot temper and his love for a foolhardy challenge and determination to beat the enemy, as we see when they're just like casually, "Oh, we need to find the North Tower," and he is like, "Let's go."
Yeah, it's a really funny scene. I found myself laughing out loud a couple times reading this particular chapter. It was a good one.
Yeah.
That scene was really funny. It really adds something to the character, like we've talked about how the castle itself is a character and is alive. And it really adds something to have it be like funny and a little goofy and the whole idea. And then they like find it and then they're like, well, now what do we do? And then yeah, it's just a weird and funny thing to me.
Yeah.
I've always liked that scene. I don't know why. I've just always liked it. It's always stuck out to me. It's like every time I know I'm about to get to it, I'm like, oh, nice. It's the one where the guy goes through all the portraits. I love that one. Yeah. And then later he will come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the whole chapter, it's a long chapter. A lot happens.
Because I think the last one was 20, these 20-something page. We are like actually a good chunk into the book.
Yeah, we're chunking it out for sure. Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, there's so many pages we're in. We're already on, what do we say? You say 96? We started on page 96 already? Right. So we're going through all these pages.
I didn't remember that the Grimm in the Tea Leaves and the Buckbeak introduction were the same chapter. I would have always guessed that those were two separate chapters because they're such distinct scenes.
Yeah.
There's not really, I mean, with the exception of them being the first day, that's what makes them, I guess, in the same chapter. But, yeah.
So I also looked up Trelawney.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing that caught my eye was the way that her name was spelled. It's spelled in this book Sibyll. So if anyone else has the American version of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, check your book and see if that's the spelling. If you don't have an American version, let us know what it is, because that is not how it's supposed to be spelled. And the reason I know that, well, one, because I was like, I asked, have I been spelling Sybil wrong for Trelawney? Like, I always thought it was Sybil. I didn't think that there were more than one L. But apparently on Pottermore, J.K. Rowling talked about this. So there's this whole, she's all about names. And so she talked about Cornish surnames or loving them. And so, like, she wanted Trelawney to be something that's kind of like, seems to suggest an old name, and it kind of goes connected to her story. So, like, Sybil Trelawney is the great-great-granddaughter of a seer named Cassandra Trelawney. And so, supposedly, like, her great-great-grandmother has this, like, you know, she is a seer. It's a very powerful, you know, capability. But that gift has been diluted over generations, and so by the time it gets to Trelawney, it's not as special or potent, or however you want to characterize it.
Yes, I think we'll learn a lot about her in book 5, but yeah, go on.
So the name Trelawney, so J.K. Rowling was talking about, like, coming up with, it was funny because she said, like, I craft, like, really detailed histories and backstories for a lot of my characters, like Dumbledore and McGonagall, but she didn't really have a very detailed backstory for Trelawney, and she thought that it was fitting. It was kind of like, oh, I just imagine her wandering around, you know, drifting through the wizarding world, trying to, like, make money off of her name, like, oh, I'm a Trelawney or whatever, and not being that successful. Yeah. That's just, like, the general backstory that she said to it. But apparently, J.K. Rowling's American editor wanted her to use the name Sybil, Sibyl. So Sybil's first name in this story is a homonym of Sybil, Sibyl, which was a female clairvoyant in ancient times.
Okay.
I don't know what that means exactly, but...
like a seer.
Okay. So the editor wanted to spell it in that way, but J.K. Rowling was like, no, I like my version, which is a variant of Sybil, Sybil. And so this Sybil is supposed to be Sybill. So if you look on any entries on Pottermore, Wizarding World, or any of this, it is spelled Sybill.
This is a deep dive, my friends.
In our book that we have in front of us, it's Siby.
That is a first printing. Maybe they changed it later.
I don't know. I guess I'll dig more into it to see if other copies have a different name or spelling of it.
Okay.
I also I don't know how much you want to talk about Trelawney specifically. We get a glimpse based on McGonagall's reaction in Transfiguration, which I love that whole exchange. McGonagall is trying very, very hard to contain herself, and she even says, like, she doesn't speak illy of her colleagues, but she's basically like, calm down, like, who's dying this time or this year? Like, this has been done before. And J.K. Rowling wrote that Trelawney and McGonagall are meant to be polar opposites in the way that they exist. And later on, we'll see sort of like a different kind of dynamic. But apparently Trelawney is aware of how the other teachers think of her. And I mean, it doesn't seem, and we got a glimpse of it with McGonagall. It seems that they're probably like, oh, you're not as good, you're a fraud or whatever. And so Trelawney actually stays in the tower, and she kind of says that in her intro. She's like, oh, hey, you probably haven't seen me. And it's really sad because J.K. Rowling wrote, unsurprisingly, perhaps she has developed an over-reliance on alcohol. So she just sits in her tower. And it's kind of sad, but
it is quite sad.
Yeah. Poor Trelawney.
Yeah, she's a really interesting character because she kind of stumbles onto the scene here in a somewhat similar way for me to Lockhart.
I was going to bring it up. I was going to ask you how, because there's two things. One is like, how do you feel oriented to her compared to your orientation to Lockhart? And the other, to me, that was more like standing out to me in the characters is how Hermione seems to be reacting to Trelawney.
She got burnt
compared
once.
to Lockhart.
She got burnt once.
Well, it's true, but it's also slightly different, I believe.
Yeah.
The subject itself, she is just straight out dismissive of in general.
Yes. I would imagine that Hermione understood exactly what McGonagall was saying about not speaking ill of her, but that divination is, not a very sophisticated art or finely tuned art. I think it's I have a very similar feeling when I first meet her to how I feel about Lockhart. She's a grifter. It's all a bunch of lies.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why I named it Vague Fortunes, because it has to do with how you do fortune telling, these sorts of strategies of saying these really vague things,
Yeah, I guess a difference for me initially between her and Lockhart is that it doesn't appear that she is... So sure, she might manipulate or do something. So like picking on Neville because he clearly seems on edge and like is most likely of this group to break a teacup and be like, oh, hey, whatever. But she's not using it for profit in the sense of like, I'm going to make a bunch of money and a brand of myself. Like she is just teaching at Hogwarts and is, I mean, from the one stance, like it's very similar because it is this sort of, the perceptions and all the narratives, discourses around divination perhaps, and you're trying to actively combat it by being like, look, like this is like, take me seriously. I can see it from that perspective. But at the same time, like... It's
like people who try to make math learning super duper fun.
Yeah, it's like...
Because they're trying to go the opposite direction of the reputation.
But it's still like, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm more like aligned with, now that I'm talking out loud, that if she was just honest and was like, hey, all the teachers, I feel, except for maybe Binns, is like, oh, my subject is the most whatever, like important, difficult, dangerous, or whatever adjectives that they use, because she introduces that and she's like, divination is one of the most difficult, like, magical arts there is, or whatever.
You don't have the aura, Hermione.
Yeah. And so the stuff that she does is actually very familiar in the, like, authoritarian archetype of teachers being like, well, no, you just don't know. Like, I know best, and, like, you're just not doing it right, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that comes from a place that's, like, very sad and like seeking validation, seeking something.
Yeah, I can handle her personal story and reframe what's going on, but I think it's always troubling to me, this idea of trying to give somebody certainty in an uncertain world. And to do it in a vague way is particularly troubling, I think, because it's very hard to prove that she's wrong or making it up.
Yeah.
And so, of course, this is a story, so we will be able to live it out, where we see how she can she starts to defend it, but also she has a cult of personality in some of her students who start to, like, basically fill it in, right? So humans are incredibly powerful inference makers. We will fill in dots between pieces of information. And so we will see how her kind of mini prophecies in this lesson, some of them start to come true, some of them don't, but they fall by the wayside and nobody ever really holds her to it. So I think it's even more interesting when we finally do get to her backstory, like what exactly she's doing here, because it's going to have a lot more depth than Lockhart. Why Dumbledore would hire her. It doesn't have to do with, like, oh, I couldn't find anybody or whatever malarkey it was for Lockhart. But
so I think, thinking about what you just said with divination and just this idea of certainty, because I also, like, I think the concept of certainty as, like, a comfort thing for people to just kind of defer to, that's probably why that sort of talk or sorts of, like, things that are created under this guise of certainty do well.
Well, so I was thinking about framing it as comfort in an uncomfortable world, but But it is closer to certainty, I think, because some of the things that she predicts are very uncomfortable in themselves. It's like you predict that she's predicting bad things. It's very interesting. It's different than some of like the proclaimed psychics in the Muggle world here of like, they tend to talk about good things like that. But I think it's you can get a sort of a sense. I wasn't even thinking
about psychics at all. I was thinking about things that are characterized as like predictive models, for example, for how the world can be, even though people who study subjects that could be used to make any sort of predictive model or some sort of model that could be useful for planning for the future would probably temper it and not say like, this is gonna, like, I can see the future. Like, that's not the dynamic that it is, even though sometimes it gets taken up that way because people...
If I'm not mistaken, she doesn't actually say that Harry is going to die, right? She just says, like, it's the Grimm or whatever, like, that death is near him or somehow involved with him. Because I think that that's true. I'll have to go back and look at it because that in and of itself would be a great example of how, like, even McGonagall has drawn the inference that she told the class that Harry was going to die, but she didn't. It's a vague thing. That she just sees the Grimm in the cup. So obviously we get the benefit of this world being very magical, and so the Grimm is involved in Harry's life, but it has nothing to do with him dying. So it's quite interesting. I have some information about the Grimm.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of notes. There was kind of a lot, but I just grabbed a few things about sort of maybe where the Grimm character comes from. Interestingly enough, like the Grim Reaper wasn't in this set of details, but it's still interesting. So one claim is, should the Grimm actually exist, that it may be an example of an animal ghost. The Grimm appears to be based on the Black Shuck of English folklore or the Cwsith of Scottish mythology, black dogs which also signal death. The Grimm may also be based on the Baracast, a large black dog in English legend. The Grimm has a habit of haunting churchyards, which could be a reference to the Church Grimm of Scandinavia and English folklore, a guardian spirit created by burying a black dog alive when a new church was founded. Fairly dark. The Grimm could be based on the urban legend of the Cadejo Negro, a large black dog with glowing red eyes that is said to kill travelers at night. This beast is said to be stopped by its opposite, the Cadejo Blanco, which protects travelers. Pretty interesting. Well, I won't read the last one because it has to do with Sirius, but it'll be useful to kind of know about the Grimm. And it's really interesting to have... I wonder about J.K. Rowling's choice to have... the Grimm involved here. It's really quite interesting, like, because she does it when all is said and done. It's a rather I don't know, mundane like reason why Harry keeps seeing the Grimm. It's quite interesting. I think it's it's just a dog. I mean, it's not just a dog, but it's really interesting. I think omens to me are really a complicated part of our lives.
Yeah,
like we look for these things. We look to project from one thing to the next.
Yeah, so Ron afterwards, and he's like, Harry, you haven't seen a black dog, have you? And Harry's like, oh, yeah, I have. And then Ron freaks out. Like, I mean, he's kind of with the class, and the class is kind of like, ooh, like everyone's gasping or whatever. It's all part of the theatrical presentation that's happening. But then...
It's a TED Talk.
When Ron actually hears... Because, again, Ron is our lens that goes deeper into the wizarding world. And so when he finds that out, he's like, oh, my Uncle Bilious, who he's named after, his middle name is Bilious. His Uncle Bilious died 24 hours after seeing the Grimm. And Hermione just passes it off. And
Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Yes, after it, therefore because of it.
And because Ron characterizes, and he says that every wizard is like terrified of the Grimm, and Hermione's like, exactly, like you do this to yourself. Like it's not like the cause of it.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
That's kind of like where she
when
comes
you
to.
have vague connections, like something like an animal and death would be. What is interesting about it is that there are a lot of things that precede a lot of bad things.
Mm-hmm.
So like by large numbers, you get these sort of patterns that aren't anything but coincidence.
Right.
This is my take on it. I know a lot of people would strongly disagree with sort of what is happening, what is possible in these types of realms, but I think it's my take on it is that I understand mathematics in a certain way to understand how these things are possible without being true. So it's really, really interesting to think about causality here, and what Hermione is getting to is very reasonable, where it's like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's why I brought up predictiveness, because that to me is like, or the way that it's interpreted is such a strong, like, if this happens, absolutely, then what follows is this. But
Right.
That's not how
you just have
models,
a chance.
Yeah, that's not how models work. Yeah. And so that's kind of like.
But I think it's also not how these omens work. It's like you're being stalked by death. Now you might escape. You could escape. But you have a chance of dying. Well, all of us have a chance of dying. So some things will come before the bad things that happen to us.
Yeah.
Some things have to happen before the bad things that happen to us. So we can think about those as omens, or we can think about them as essentially unrelated.
So take Neville as the example again. So she says the very first thing to literally set him off. And so that, to me, I think is the illustration of what Hermione is talking about, is like, if you're told like something bad is going to happen to you and you yourself are already like on edge and jittery, like, then you're prone to make that happen. You are more likely to make that happen because it's in the back of your mind. It's part of like unconscious, like he's probably thinking to himself after she said that to him, like, oh, if you break it, don't break it, don't break it, don't break it. He breaks it.
Oh, yep.
And it's all part of it.
So that's a good scene. Then we have McG, which isn't too much. And then we go to Hagrid's.
Yeah, Hagrid.
What do you think about this? You're just annoyed at Malfoy? Wait.
Are we going to class first? Yeah, okay.
Do you have something else?
No. I thought, for some reason, I thought you were talking about in his hut. But
the end?
Okay. Okay, Malfoy is the embodiment of, I see this dynamic a lot online. I play a video game, or actually lots of video games, and live stream and do stuff, and I've seen people, I hang out with other people who do the same. We're like in our 30s, we're not kids, whatever, and people come in and they're like, oh, why don't you grow up and blah, blah, blah. Like, that is Malfoy to me. It's just like, let people just like be silly. And Hagrid is so sweet and whimsical and just like pure. He's just enjoying something that he loves so deeply. And Malfoy is just dismissing it and intentionally trying to make him feel bad. And I get it. The Monster Book of Monsters, kind of annoying that you didn't tell anyone, like, oh, stroke the back of it. But that's where it starts, and he just keeps going on and on about it.
I listened to you, and it was great. But in the background to you, Winston is laying on the couch, up, watching you, and he's just falling asleep. As soon as you looked at him, he woke up. But his eyes were just, it was amazing.
Baby beast.
Anyway, yes. Yeah, Hagrid, I mean, it's also from our teacher perspective, I get an interesting vibe as well, because without knowing what Grubby Plank would have done, the idea of like starting them off fast and doing like getting something exciting, using motivation, doing a hook, like having it be hippogriffs instead of flobberworms and things like this, it's actually quite appropriate when it comes to teaching people. Like you can leap forward. You can motivate the whole care of magical creatures idea by showing like what types of creatures you can care for, and some are more exciting than others. But you can get the philosophy of caring for magical creatures, learning it, but probably easier by introducing these really interesting and dangerous, that there is a risk reward to it from the teaching perspective. I love it. I mean, I think it's great that it's like, to me, it reminds me a little bit of like, it's the opposite of Umbridge. It's kind of like Snape. Like, a lot of the teachers are actually quite good because day one, they do a fundamental thing related to, and Lupin will do the same, right?
No one's like, let's read the syllabus.
Or that's right,
Let's look
right.
at this.
So there's
Let's
usually
talk
like
about the rules of this
Snape's
class.
like, potion making, you might die. Good luck.
Yeah.
Let's make one.
Yeah.
It's really quite interesting. I think there's something about the way magic works in this world that like is actually quite conducive to good teaching. Because like it is so many of them can execute simple spells on day one, as opposed to needing like a lot of study in order to execute a whole bunch of spells all at once. There is this buildup of like, what is the one that's the famous one? Wingardium Leviosa. Yeah. Where it's like, just make this thing float, and that they're able to start with a feather, but they still get to see like the act of making something float. It just is really conducive. But I think Hagrid's actually got one of the harder ones, where it's just like caring for creatures. Like, you have sort of a trade-off. I mean, he didn't come in hot with an acromantula. That would have been really something.
Okay, but he says, like, in his, like, drunken upsetness that, like, oh, maybe I should have started with a flopper worm. And
Right.
from my perspective, that doesn't matter. Draco is still going to be
100%.
the worst.
Something would have happened.
Because Draco is literally, he is a bigot. He hates Hagrid. He does not like him, and he's out to get him, and he cannot believe that someone as superior as him has to be taught by the groundskeeper. Like and so from that perspective, it doesn't matter. You are always going to have Malfoy. Like the likelihood that Malfoy would have injured himself with the flopperworm is very low, but at what
he
cost?
Would have done
is
something
kind
else.
Of like
he would have done something else.
Yeah,
though, right?
yeah. And that, like, from a like perspective as a teacher and being like, yeah.
If Hagrid starts with a flopperworm, Draco would be like, hey, Dad, tell the governors that we started with like first year malarkey, like stuff that I knew when I was a child. So there was never going to be, I agree completely. It's coming in from bad faith, like with bad faith. He is doing that. He is on the search for a reason to leverage his power against Hagrid because he's a bigot and because...
If you haven't noticed, I have no remorse for Draco. He deserved every bit of his
Of course.
injury.
Oh my God. It was awesome. It was swift justice, and I loved it. I guess it's
Draco
kind of
haters.
reversed, because it was like
Draco haters.
he gets hurt, and now he's going to leverage it against Sirius. Against Hagrid. Yeah. There's Hagrid.
Yeah, little Hagrid. Oh my gosh, I felt so bad. So the three of them are like concerned, obviously, because they were so excited. They were so excited at the feast to find out that Hagrid was their teacher, and they're like, "Oh, this is such a big deal for him. Like, he was wrongly accused of things, and finally his name was cleared, and now he's a teacher. He's a professor at Hogwarts now. Finally, first day, like, goes terrible, and so they're like, let's go check on him."
I'm kind of surprised that Draco isn't like, how are we being taught by an ex-con? Because he's been in Azkaban.
Draco's the worst. But they go in, and Hagrid is just drunk, and I feel so bad because Hermione has to be put, well, she doesn't have to, but she takes on this role of, like, motherly cleanup, which made me a little sad. But and then, like, once he dunks his head in the water and then is like, Wait a second.
Quite a literally sobering
wait
moment.
a second.
Yeah.
And this whole time I'm just like, all you people with Harry. Well, so that was actually going back to the divination classroom when Trelawney is like, oh, you have an enemy or whatever, and Hermione's just like, obviously. Like,
what?
Come on, this is year 3. We know that Voldemort, the Dark Lord, is trying to murder Harry Potter.
But I am the chosen one. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was a doozy of a first day. I forgot about
it. Was,
day.
It was. And we didn't mention, I'll just mention in passing, the couple of moments where Hermione's schedule comes up and there's something confusing going on.
She already talked to McGonagall.
She has 3 classes
fixed the schedule with McGonagall.
Scheduled at the same time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yep. Poor Hermione. Yeah, we'll see.
It's going to be a good story. It's going to be a good book.
I wonder if we interviewed adult Minister Granger, what she would say about her 3rd year at Hogwarts.
Absolutely not.
She'd be like, no comment.
No comment.
Well, that's all I have.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
Alrighty.
All right. Till next time.
Wands ready.